Hello and welcome to the Nutritank podcast, where we interview leading experts within the field of food systems, nutrition, and lifestyle medicine. Our aim is to empower you, the next generation of healthcare professionals and change makers. We believe that the valuable knowledge and experience of our guests will inspire you to act and join the movement in creating a healthier population. Welcome everyone, Ian here, Nutritank co-founder. We hope you enjoyed our last episode where my co-host Luke had a super interesting discussion with food journalist Sheila Dillon, who is one of the 4 presenters of BBC Radio 4's The Food Programme. If you haven't already listened, I urge you to go check it out after this episode. I've actually had the pleasure of being interviewed by the BBC Food Programme on a number of occasions, and it's got to be one of my favourite radio series for sure. So thank you for joining me today for this episode of the Nutritank podcast. Today's guest is a very special person, especially to me. Dr Broadley Westerduin is a mother of 4 boys who has always loved being outside. She studied psychology at Bristol University and went on to teach in Devon before completing her PhD in working memory and her master's in educational psychology. She has worked as an educational psychologist since 1991 and is part of the group for developing embodiment practices for educational psychology. She trained as an EMDR therapist. EMDR stands for Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing, a type of psychotherapy. And she is an outdoor nature therapist and has developed ways to support children, young people, and others using nature therapy. Loves all things outside, especially time horse riding in wild places, and gardening and growing. Hello and welcome to the Nutritank podcast. Thank you so much for being a guest, Dr. Irene Broadley Westerduin. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a huge honour, and especially to be interviewed by you, way over in Australia.
Yes.
Thank you.
So for those astutely listening, you would have realised that myself and Dr. Broadley Westerduin are related due to our surnames. So Irene is actually my mother. So it's an absolute honour to have her on the podcast today. Could you define for us what nature therapy is?
Oh, yes. Well, it basically, the main part of it is about being out in nature and really enjoying that ability to just have time outside and letting nature heal us psychologically. NBIs are programs and activities where individuals can engage with nature and improve their health and well-being. So this is becoming a more and more important aspect of our lives as we spend more and more time inside. And there's a lot of research that's gone into it, into the blue-green therapy, which is where there's been a lot of psychological research about improving all of that side of thing and about the benefits of spending time in green spaces. And then there's the Blue Health Project, which has done a lot of research on being near blue oceans and rivers and lakes and how blue represents calm and tranquility. So that's a big organization as well that's put into place a lot of research and evidence showing how that's improving health and well-being. And there's another body of research that's done a huge amount of work, which is the forest bathing, and where there's a lot of scientific evidence for reducing heart rate and blood pressure, which in turn helps our anxiety. The whole term actually was, you can't go and talk about this without talking about the professors Rachel and Stephen Kaplan, who did environmental psychology and did something called attention restorative theory, which is about how landscape designs and impacts us. So that's a lot of the work about attention and how a lot of things can lead to mental fatigue, and that nature helps us to be restored.
Amazing. So what conditions or what is nature therapy targeting? What conditions are nature therapy targeting?
Well, I guess one of the main things is that it can really help restore what we now call the vagus nerve, which is the wandering nerve. And that is something that really impacts our ability to rest, replenish, and recover. Nowadays, in our world, we spend so much time in that flight and fight kind of mode where we're looking out, we're hypervigilant, we're constantly aware, which was fine in the wild when we lived there. But now it's almost like it's become the state that we're in from the moment we wake up and the alarm goes off to. So what nature helps us to do is it helps us to be to recover. So one of the main areas of research then there's about nature-rich environments has been by the Meredith et al. 2020 studies that's compared students in urban areas with those in natural environments and how they've been able to really improve their mental distress, such as anxiety, stress, and depression, by being in nature. So even just spending 10 minutes either sitting or walking in a range of natural settings has really improved their help. And also the other thing that it really helps is it helps our focus and what we'd call sharpened cognition. Now, obviously, this is a really important part for the field that I work in because attention deficit is becoming such a growing field. So understanding nature and cognitive benefits is vital for us to really know how to help this rather than just say to children, you need more ADHD medication. So the research, and there's been some really good research by Berman and about understanding nature and its cognitive benefits in 2019, showed that the exposure to nature, natural environments, is good for our brains. It improves our working memory, our cognitive flexibility, and our attention to task, which is incredibly vital, really, because this is an area where we need that help. And I think part of that is because everything in nature is much softer rather than the man-made lines. So it's not that the visual system is sort of relaxed, which then helps our immune system. And we can then have these lovely improvements. And also it helps lower stress and helps us to have better sleep. A lot of studies have found that sleeping is much better when you walk by water, we've spent time outside. And it just, lots of other studies have found a greater level of confidence, feelings of self-worth, and sense of purpose.
That is some deep, rich science behind why this is such an important field and such an important therapy. So thank you for sharing that. So I know you touched upon a couple of those, you actually quite a few papers there. Was there any you think are really quite landmark or important that we want to share with the audience about the science behind nature therapy in a bit more depth, or anything more you can share about that?
Yes, there are actually, and I'd like to just touch on one that's done by some of your colleagues in Australia just last year about mental health clinicians' perception of nature-based interventions within community health services. Though that's sort of out of my field because I work more with children, I just found it a very interesting study by Rachel Tambia. I probably pronounced that wrong. But what that looked at is how mental health clinicians were seeing the benefits and the barriers to implementing nature-based therapies in their mental health communities. And they found that it was relaxing, refreshing, and therapeutic, and it improved the mood, the calmness, relaxation, sense of empowerment. And of course, the most important thing, which a lot of nature therapy does, is a sense of connection, social connection. So that lowers isolation and loneliness. I mean, obviously, there was always, and there are was barriers, but there could be lack of motivation, the geographical accessibility, and of course, the biggest thing is organizational barriers around safety risks because people are afraid of nature.
Wow. That's amazing to touch upon. Also, just thinking about those barriers, because I'm sure a lot of listeners will be thinking, "Oh, that's very, um, yeah, that's great to have this therapy there, but there are so many barriers to stopping it from taking place. Um, Thinking about those barriers, as you've just mentioned, organizational, but also people living in inner cities or in, the long shift work, they're not going to see very much nature at all.
Mm.
Thinking about those barriers, what can we do as an individual, or what advice would you give to someone who wants to get more nature therapy into their self care, to overcome those barriers? What advice, like small steps, could you give?
I think sometimes the very simplest ones that you feel that you can do is the best step. And I sometimes think it's a bit like a dose of medicine, that you want to start with the smallest dose and improve that. So whether it is just taking your coffee and sitting outside, finding a place that you feel really safe and that you feel that you're just getting a bit of sunlight, that you just feel that you're with some green around you, and then just open up your consciousness to sort of feel if you can hear the birds, see something beautiful, something new that you haven't seen before, and then let nature do your work. And I do think sometimes finding simple solutions can be the most helpful, but it is that connection. You can go and do anything, but not have that consciousness. And nature obviously is so strong that it will impact you whether you're consciously trying to or not. It might be later, but it is those small steps. And sometimes it is finding things like bringing nature into your place, so that you could perhaps have a plant in your office. You could have a picture of your favorite scene that you really like, um, and having that connection as well is really fantastic. So it's little things that can make the difference, that you can then slowly work up from and
Mm,
and do. And I think sometimes it might be finding a path that you like. In the olden times, we were always path finding and finding the best path, and that's
mm,
a huge metaphor for our life, which is what I love about nature. It gives us these metaphors. We now don't need to path find because we've got Google to do the path finding. But sometimes if we find our path that we like, that we can walk, that makes us feel safe and connected, whether we've got 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or half an hour, that could be quite empowering, and think I'm just going to go and walk my
mhm,
path. And there's a lot of research
mhm,
and lots of different communities that really highlight how important that is
mhm,
on
mhm.
finding the path. Yeah.
Amazing to think, yeah, just to have your own small 5 minute, 10 minute path you walk after a busy day. It's going to give you some benefits, but it's a template that you can go on. You can kind of go to it without even thinking. Uh,
Yes, I
and
like
I
the
guess like an analogy,
template.
yeah, like an analogy would be like you're sitting on the sofa at home and you can't think about what Netflix show to watch. You're there stuck half an hour. But with like this, you coming home, you've got a path up your sleeve you're going to take, um, and maybe you have more than one path. Is that the idea?
Oh, exactly. Yes, that would be the idea, that you would have them, like you say, up your sleeve. And my absolute passion that I feel very strongly about is to have the right path or the right environment that you can go to for different moods or different challenges that you're facing. For example, if you've got to make sometimes a big decision, going and having a walk can really help you to um, lower the stress, and then you can think better, because as I spoke about before, nature does help us lower stress and have better decision making. So sometimes you might think, oh, if I go for a walk up a hill, that will give me a better perspective. And then you've got a deeper perspective, and that will impact your cognition and your decision making as well. Or you might be thinking, I feel like I need some nurture and feeling safe and comforted. So you could go to a woodland area where you really, really feel loved and protected, for example. And another place, sometimes you want to have have that vista, being in a meadow with beautiful flowers. That could be very de-stressing as well. So it's having beautiful, it's having those. I almost see it as a card system where you have the mood or have the impact that you have to have, and then link it with a place that you can get to easily, the medicine that you need for your soul.
Are you a healthcare professional looking to elevate your knowledge of nutrition and lifestyle medicine? Nutritank CIC wants to empower you to have the communication skills and knowledge of lifestyle medicine to improve your patients' health through free CME accredited webinars hosted every Monday evening. Learn from leading experts in the field and gain access to cutting edge research and best practice. Here's what you gain through our webinars: enhanced knowledge of nutrition and lifestyle medicine and applying it in clinical practice, continued medical education credits to maintain your license, and free access to a library of previously recorded high-quality educational webinars. Take action now. Register for upcoming webinars or become a member at nutritank.com. The links will be provided in the show notes. Invest in your clinical practice and patients' well-being and fuel their health with Nutritank CIC. Okay, yeah, I've got the next question. Could you take our audience through a little bit about your career and your story behind why you started using nature therapy in the first place?
Oh, it's a very interesting question. Well, to be honest with you, I grew up in some of the busiest cities in the world: Bombay, Delhi, Rome, Bangkok, Nairobi, and I've always craved the countryside. So much so that when I was a child, I wrote this poem that was like, "Oh, in the wild, wild countryside, I love it, I love it." And it's still pretty much my mantra today. Um, there was always beautiful places to visit because my dad was a dairy engineer, so we went to very remote areas, anywhere where there was cattle, really. But in the summer holidays, I would search and discover beautiful countryside areas when I was visiting family in Europe. I was pretty much left to myself, so I explored a lot. So much so that I was even once brought back by the police in Belfast from one of my early morning ramblings as a young child. But I then went on and did my degree in psychology and my PGC and worked as a teacher. And when I was working in Devon County Council, for Devon County Council in a special school, they very kindly, I think they realized my need of loving being out of the classroom and how much the children benefited from it. So they paid for me to go up to Snowdonia and do a 2-week mountain leadership course. And that qualified me to take the children on expeditions and camping things on Dartmoor. And it was just wonderful to see the change in the children, their resilience and their understanding the world and all the things that they learnt. And so that was really fantastic. But I went on and I did my PhD in memory and in educational psychology, and I really shifted my studies. And I went and I was searching and searching for something about psychology outdoors. And I went on this course for a year in Derbyshire, learning about nature therapy through the seasons. And I went on to do the advanced part of it and my EMDR training. And that's really what has brought me to wanting to bring all of these things together to have more therapy and connection with outside. And I've also been quite involved with forest schools and education outdoors. So that's a little bit about that.
And so could you talk a little bit about what impact nature therapy has had when you've brought it into your clinical practice as an educational psychologist for children? And maybe you can give some examples of how it's benefited some of your children.
Well, it has made a significant difference, especially for children who I see who are really very, very have a lot of sensory processing difficulties, and which is not surprising, really, because we live in this world of bright lights, huge amount of noise from traffic. Everything is beeping and making things that set their nervous system on alert. And so I've had children who, well, I'm wearing headphones now, but have to permanently wear headphones to sort of soothe the sounds of the world. And then they wear very dark glasses. They have to have very careful kind of clothes on. Children who really struggle in a mainstream classroom, or in any classroom, actually, even a very specialist classroom, they cannot tolerate it. And I've found that these type of children who, sometimes they find the sunlight and things like that quite difficult, but they change in them when I've taken them outside, and when they've actually, there's a process that you go through of looking at pictures and everything. But it's also amazing how quickly that happens. You might think that you need to go through a lot, but actually the transition has always been so fast, because with a lot of these children, we're always talking about how transitions are very difficult, but the transition for them into nature is rapid. And that also means that their difference that they've able to cope with has accelerated. And I remember one child that I worked with, and he was absolutely lovely, but he was so on alert and so fearful of everything. Couldn't even touch grass. He was very soon almost rolling in grass and couldn't have enough of it. And he'd never stepped in a river before or felt that. And his body awareness, his understanding of himself just changed. And he now is in a mainstream school, having not been at school for many years, and doing superb well. And I do think that it was the nature that helped that transition. But there have been lots and lots of children that I've seen wonderful changes in, through being able to access and enjoy. I think it's the enjoy that is really lovely. They suddenly find something that isn't judgmental, isn't critical, and that they can just see, and it's the softness of it as well, often, although nature is hard too, there's no doubt.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And although you don't work in the NHS, you work with clients, you work with obviously very tough cases. Has nature therapy helped you and your sort of day to day, or helps you in your career, and what and how?
Well, I think what I have learned from it is also understanding a lot more about the seasons and the impact that the seasons have on us, because we're often so detached from that when we're inside. And it's not only, this is one of the things that we really did in our nature therapy course, that it's not only the 4 seasons, but it's also the seasons of life. So, how it relates to being a child, an adolescent, an adult, and then the wisdom of the elder. And actually that we are all of that at some stage. We've always got our childlike part, and that's okay, because all these seasons are rotating. So that is something that's really important. And I think for me, nature therapy is really putting in a lot more about how to reduce this fight or flight and soothe the vagus nerve. And, we sometimes in education, we have this whole thing about 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. But I think that we need to have more about the restorative regulation and soothing of the nervous system through the vagus nerve that impacts our mind and our soul and our body. And all the research shows we cannot learn, we cannot heal unless we are restored and relaxed. And so nature therapy gives us that. It helps us to regulate our emotions. We don't have to be fast or competitive. And a lot of, there's been so much research. Stanford University has found that if people who worked in nature, their brain activity was less associated with like depression and negative emotions. And it's a lot about our prefrontal cortex that when it's activated constantly and it's repetitive and negative, that can be decreased by walking in nature, where we are reconnected. And then, the power of the remedy of walking and healing, and what walking does and being in nature, it stops those ruminating things that cause the anxiety. And it gives us new ways of thinking and different ways of evolving our minds. We see metaphors that are changing, and it's time for reflection. Nature gives us a lot of time for reflection. I think it's also remembering not only ourselves, but perhaps old ways of like walking old paths and things that give us comfort, and just connection. So yeah, there's a lot of, I also think that there's so much in nature therapy about walking in it and path finding and like if we make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. We can retrace our steps. We can, it's about the decision making and the practice. And I think that this is where we get so stuck in our world now, that we're so fearful of making the wrong decision because of consequences. While if you're walking and you take a different path, you can retrace. And we do come to dead ends when we're walking and we take the wrong path. So it's like it might be overgrown, it might be rocky, it might be too muddy. Understanding that we can change that route is really important. And like there's one metaphor that I just love in from the walks that I do, is that like if you come across a huge obstacle in your path, like a fallen tree, there will be what we call a smile line or a desire path around it. And when we take that, we get past the obstacle. And so that I find is a really useful metaphor for life and for therapy, that we can find alternatives. And I think what happens is that when we get stuck in one thought pattern, thinking of getting over something is almost too much to cope with on our daily life. So it gives us these wonderful metaphors that we can use in our daily.
Wow, thank you. They were some really beautiful metaphors and really powerful as well. Thinking about our audience, healthcare professionals, they've got incredibly, we have, busy schedules, 12 to 13-hour shifts, sometimes 3 to 4 times a week, a little gap plus, and, an extra 3 on top of that sometimes. And it goes on and on and on. Does nature therapy also benefit healthcare professionals? What's the deal with that?
Oh, hugely. And actually, that is probably the area where I feel the most strongly, from my life as well, and really understanding about how nature is a healer. So it is, even if sometimes it's what you are not doing when you're at work that will help you at work, which is what I find. So if you have on your days off had that wonderful time off, it's it's that memory of doing that can really help you when you can't get out. However, if you do get that 5-minute break, actually getting out and pinging into what you're going to get from it, using all 5 senses for those 5 minutes.
When you say getting out, do you mean getting out outside of the
If you
hospital
can,
or the practice that you are in, and
yeah,
getting out for 5 minutes into some form of nature, be that a garden, be that a tree near the park where
yeah,
you're working? Do you, okay.
yeah. I think it is about it's very difficult, I know, if you work for the NHS, but if you do have a break and you are allowed to take that break, boundary setting that break is important. But again, it comes to, if you've got those 5 minutes, it's not, oh, I need to do this first. It's, I need to do this and have even that 1 minute with the fresh air and then come back. But it is tough, because you've got to think about yourself, which is what we're not used to doing when we're in care professional roles. And that's why I'm very I feel very strongly about care professionals being able to set these boundaries for their needs of needing nature, and knowing how much it will help them in their work. And actually, there is a crisis with care professionals and their anxiety and their mental health now, and their lack, that the resilience, because of the impact of the expectations, the demands on their time, is being hugely eroded. And I mean, I noticed that hugely with my work, and so I can't imagine what it's like in an NHS or hospital situation. But it's the important thing is what we can sometimes do for ourselves, so that it will help others and the next generations. And one thing my supervisors always really work with me on is that I need to model this for other people. So if I'm modeling not caring for myself, what's it doing to my clients and my patients?
Mm,
So it is that modeling of being able to say, no, I need to take this break. I need to be outside for 5 minutes.
mm,
And to your colleagues.
mm.
Um, and and it's understanding the dose that you need to take. I think often it is if you can make that decision quickly and just go and do it, it stops that rumination about thinking, oh, should I do it? Should I not? You just don't go through that. You curtail, you cut that circuit and you get outside.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Um, so it's thinking now about the healthcare professionals who are working in the NHS. They would love to be able to advise. They have an understanding now, having listened to you, how important nature therapy is, even in small doses, for themselves. But maybe they have a patient or a client in their consultation room, or they're talking to a client about what they could do to improve their health and their well-being. Um, what sort of practical tips could our healthcare professionals give to their patients, like as a start,
Yeah.
first steps?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is very difficult because it really depends on who those patients are.
Mm,
Um, and really, I think the most important thing, and this is what always comes into it and never probably has in any other generation before, is the health and safety part of it.
yeah, of course.
And to be honest with you, that's never been an issue to the
Mm,
extent that it has now. And obviously, there are dangers, there's dangers everywhere. And I think that's
mm,
one of the things that nature therapy actually does help you with, that it can be dangerous, but is it good as well? I think there are so many factors to take into consideration, depending on the the people that you're working with. So for a lot of people that I work with, they are wheelchair bound and they
mm,
have a lot of difficult situations. So it would be the
mm,
terrain, it would be the amount of sunlight, which could be
mhm,
impactful. But I think the most important thing is finding that safe place that you can go to quickly, whether it's under a tree.
mhm,
Um, so I think accessibility is vital. It
mm,
needs to be easy. Anything that is tricky or difficult is quite it's too much to
mhm,
it again, talking about that shortcutting, it makes that decision making about doing it really complex. So if it's going and
mm,
sitting near a bridge and watching the water flow down, that is amazing.
yeah.
And actually, I have been surprised on my little walks around, finding how many people are actually doing this now. And it's really nice to see
Mm,
people
mm,
just standing, watching the water, or being near a tree,
yeah.
journaling next to it, bringing their cup of
Mhm,
tea, sitting there.
mhm.
It's going back to something that was.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. So just to sort of reflect on what you've just said there, and um, it's almost as if you're, discussing with the client or the patient, do you have anywhere that you can think of that you feel comfortable, safe, relaxed, be it in a tree, is it in your garden, is it in the park next to where you live? Think of that place, try to go and sit there or try and be in that space. And if that's the easiest, safest, most accessible place you can be, try and do that at least, once a week or little and often as you can. So that would sort of be a good starting point.
yes, that's an excellent starting point. And, I think dosage is vital to understand. Um, and knowing that then you can, when you have time, increase that and find other places. And it is good to make with a brief journal note. Maybe I was in the
Mm,
forest it made me feel happy or safe, or
Mm.
you know, and helping that. And I think it's the emotional connection, because the more that we make the connections, the more our brain is also making those lovely fast connections and
Mm.
healing itself.
Mm.
um and I think that's what it's about. It's about enabling our brain and our body to have this connection about what is good for us. So
Mm.
what is good for us is, or what is good for me when I'm feeling this, is being here. So it's like that kind of equation that you'd want to set up for the mind-body connection, which, as we know from Bessel van der Kolk, is so important for our
Mm.
well-being. So using that kind of simple, easy step for us is what
Mm.
will help us just get out. I mean, obviously, some people need a huge amount more dosage. You know, they might need 3 days in the wilderness
Mm.
between shifts to
No,
really
I certainly do.
recalibrate.
I certainly do.
Yeah, and that's good, because then you know what makes you
Mm.
reconnect, what makes you feel replenished, and what sets you back on track for doing that. In fact,
Mm.
that's what I'm going to be doing. Tomorrow I'm going off for my wilderness experience, and I'm really excited. Nervous, I will admit, but excited because it's somewhere new.
What are you doing tomorrow?
Well, I'm going off to Yukon, actually, to a really wilderness place, having to carry on my pack horse all the goods for 2 weeks and camping equipment. So that will be an amazing nature therapy experience, of which I'd love to share at some stage what I've learned.
Sounds definitely. That sounds like a very high dose. Um, just going back there to an author and psychiatrist you just mentioned, Bessel
Mm.
van der Kolk, who wrote the very famous and amazing book, The Body Keeps the Score. And obviously, in that book, if you haven't already read it, he does talk about alternative treatments to mental health conditions. And it's a fantastic book. And some of those alternative treatments are things like nature therapy, yoga, dance, and how impactful they have been in treating mental health compared to an injunction with pharmacological treatment. What did you think about that book? I'd just like to get your view on that.
Oh, I mean, it's absolutely amazing. I remember many years ago, I did actually meet Bessel van der Kolk in London when he was doing a conference at the Institute of
Mm.
Child and Adolescent Psychology, and it was just amazing to hear him firsthand, and then to read his book and know that we don't need to rely on all these pharmaceuticals for things like all the childhood difficulties that we're seeing that are so prevalent in our society
Mm.
today. And it is this sort of disconnect that we've
Mm.
experienced between the mind and body. And nature therapy does, for example, and EMDR and all the other things that he has put together in his book that really, really help traumatized bodies and
Yeah.
minds.
And just for our audience, could you just explain the term and the treatment EMDR? What does it stand for?
EMDR, actually very interesting. It was started off as a through walking. So Shapiro was trying to make a decision, contemplate, was anxious about that, and she went for a walk, as you often do when you have to make a complex decision. And she noticed in the trees that the light was going like this, and that really helped her with the shadow and the light make these decisions, and it was doing something to her brains. So it was the eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which is what EMDR stands for, which is about the bilateral stimulation between the left and the right hemisphere, which is what we
Mm.
do in EMDR. It's
Mm.
helping to make the connections between the brain so that we're not stuck. That's a very, very brief overview of it, because it's obviously, but it has been incredibly well researched about how to understand how we can shift trauma from our body and mind, and how we get stuck in that. And so it is taking things out of our mind where we ruminate and we worry, and then that impacts our body, to feeling it. So it's always, where do you feel it in your body? So it could be in your stomach, it could be in your shoulders, it could be, anywhere. And how to resolve that and get it out of your body, because otherwise, as Bessel van der Kolk says, the body holds the trauma, and this is why we get so many gut or shoulder or body problems that are actually related to our anxiety and thinking. So I find that the Shapiro's EMDR and all the other offshoots of it that I've studied along the way and worked with and used with clients really, really helps. In fact, I had EMDR myself over 10 years ago after I had a car accident, and it really, really helped. And I always thought, when I've got the time and capacity, I want to do this. And so having had first-hand experience of it in how it helped me physically and mentally, it's I found it really, really beneficial for everybody that I've used it with. And sometimes you have to change it around, but it helps you step outside yourself and to see things from a different way.
Amazing. So I'm just going to talk now a bit about what your vision is for a nature therapy. You brought it into your practice around it. I think you said, was it a couple of years ago, 8 years ago?
Yeah.
And you've started to share now on social media some of your insights are on and learnings from your own life, and sharing it for the for general public to review. So, what's your vision for using nature therapy in your practice, or in where you're going with it?
Well, I think to be honest, there's twofold. One of them is very much in my supervision with other psychologists and with other therapists and people when I've done self-care for them, is about how we as healthcare professionals look after ourselves through nature therapy and that dosage for ourselves. Because as anybody who's dealing with complex issues, we carry a lot of that with us, whether we realize it or not. And so nature and walking in nature is for me, and I know for other people, is an amazing way of releasing that, so that we're not storing other people's trauma, and also, the that we might not have done enough, or with the wrong decision, and things that really are not helping us. It's also not being criticized. I think, nowadays, with people being able to Google everything, they will always see that we haven't maybe done enough. We could be doing other things that are perhaps not in our remit. So I think for me, I am very, very determined that actually nature therapy and walking outside is part of our continuing professional development, our CPD. That
Yeah.
actually it's there not as something to feel guilty about, that we've got to, like, grasp things, but that actually it's allocated, if that makes sense. So much,
Yeah.
like, as much as, this team meeting or this event that you have to attend to get your CPD points, and maybe it might be that I know that this is actually a growing thing, that some groups are actually going to nature places to have their CPD, because as soon as you're outside, you're going to have a different relationship with your colleagues as well. You're going to have a different way of responding. Going to have a different way of listening as well. So those are really, really important things. And also, I think for me, the most important thing is about this restorative avenue that nature therapy can give to our vagus nerve, and and how important that is for children, because this growing amount of children that we're dealing with on a daily basis. I mean, the statistics are so high that, especially since COVID,
Yeah.
the it's just accelerated unbelievably, and we don't have the capacity to be actually helping all of these children. Being outside and all those R's that I was talking about before, about the restoration, the
Yeah.
remembering, the cognitive benefits of being in nature will really, really help. And there's been wonderful, wonderful studies by the Wildlife Trust, which I
Mhm.
find beautiful, because they commissioned the Institute of Education at UCL to do a study about what nature has on children. And they found that how much it impacted their overall well-being and their views on nature, and also just their pure enjoyment. And there was
Mhm.
like, I mean, this was a study by Dr. Sheldrake and colleagues in 2019, and they said that even spending a little bit of time in nature, these children felt that 90% felt they'd learned something new about nature. They felt
Mhm.
79% felt better about schoolwork.
Mhm.
They
Mhm.
felt that they were capable of trying new things, which,
Mhm.
I think is really important for our whole motivation. They felt more confident in themselves. They
Yeah.
had better relationship with teachers and peers. Huge, huge changes. And I just, this is profound and
Mm.
just shows that how it impacts children's well-being, motivation, and confidence, things that are really difficult to improve
Yeah.
otherwise.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So thank you for that. Hey everyone. I hope you're enjoying this episode so far and learning a lot. For those of you who are new listeners, welcome. If you're finding this information valuable, I would love for you to consider joining our regular listener family. Just hit that follow button wherever you're listening, and you'll never miss a new episode. By the way, one of our main goals is to educate as many healthcare professionals as possible about the power of nutrition and lifestyle medicine. So if you know someone who might benefit from this information, whether it's a colleague, friend, or family member working in the field, please consider sharing this episode with them. Now let's get back to the show and dive deeper. I'm just going to move on now to just talk about how health professionals who are listening or interested members of the public, what can they do in their workplace communities to bring more nature therapy um, into practice or into changing their workplace environment?
I think I mean a lot of workplaces do this now, obviously,
Mm,
but having a plants inside, having pictures of beautiful places,
mm,
um, having a table perhaps and a chair outside where people can go for their break.
mhm,
Um, and I think a lot of it is remembering that nature is a healer. So
mm,
perhaps it is finding more times that people can have breaks, that they can actually go outside. Um, it is
mhm,
perhaps enabling having that conversation, and perhaps instead of the decision making part of it is like I was talking about before, is doing it. Um, of course, it's not going to make everybody happy. Some people don't like being in the sunlight. Some people don't like the insects.
yeah,
So it is finding the right environment where it's got canopy, perhaps, where they feel safe. But it is finding that area where they feel safe. And
mhm, mhm,
I really think that the more that we can open it up as something that's not a woo-woo thing, because there is so much research done, but it's a real thing, the more it will help open up the conversation and be aware that there is really good research in this that allows us to move forward.
mhm.
It's free. That's the big
It's
thing.
free. Yes, and really important for the NHS to know that it's free. They're always looking for the next cheaper alternative. So, what resources could you direct our audience to? Be that a website or anything else you can think of. Doesn't have to be a website or companies that are doing amazing things in this space.
Well, there are a lot, so you can, it depends on your local area. In fact, a lot of local authorities are doing amazing things and really
Mm,
trying to work through this. yeah, in fact, my other son's just done a really fantastic thing through his mafia about bringing people outside and tuning into nature and mindfulness and seeing how that really impacts their work. So, I would highly recommend looking at some of the things that he's done in different natural environments, such as the Thames Water and in Hampshire. There are some really good books out there as well. I mean, the late Martin Jordan wrote this incredible book, Nature and Therapy, and it really outlines how we can use counselling and psychotherapy in natural environments. And then Grounded, a book by Ruth Allen, that really helps goes through the theory of understanding nature and our relationship to find that deeper connection and stillness and solitude and resilience through nature. And they are really, really wonderful. I also think that there are lots of fantastic websites about ancient paths and pilgrimages. And even if you just do a tiny little bit of it, I think it gives you that feeling of exploring ancient paths, your senses, and what you might love about nature, and also the history of thousands and thousands of people having walked those paths, perhaps even thousands of years ago, which is a really grounded and rooted exercise to do. There are beautiful paths all over the world, really, but I mean, I'm talking about in England where there are amazing ones. I also think another way, if you are interested in that, is by beautiful poetry, Wendell Berry, The Peace of the Wild Things, and then Gerald Manley Hopkins has written such beautiful poems about nature. So there are beautiful ways that we can access nature through art and poetry and reading, but I think the most important way is by experiencing it yourself.
Brilliant.
And actually embody that, which is what, the whole Bessel van der Kolk and understanding your body is when you embody it, you get that sense of what it does for you. And then you have a really real way of being able to share that experience.
Wow, that was some amazing resources. Thank you. And you have given so many tips, but we like to ask our guests if they could provide our audience with one self-care tip that they could start today or tomorrow, but almost immediately.
So I think the simplest thing is to make it an automatic and simple habit that has no effort and no thought, that you can go outside and reset. So that means finding somewhere that you feel safe, happy, and protected, whether it's just around the corner if you're in a big city, or if it's sitting next to the window with a plant, but somewhere that you can go and you can press that reset button. Now, I know how frustrating it is to set that reset button if my computer breaks down, because I don't want to lose anything. But I know that the only way that I can actually go forward is if I press that reset button. And sometimes it requires time, but you can't actually do anything until you press that reset button. So it is finding a way. It might even be having a picture of a reset button in your mind to have that metaphorical thing, but having something that I can reset. It could be touching a stone that you found on a beach that was a really special occasion. It could be a little twig that you've put next to a window. Whatever it is, find your reset button.
And where can people find you? Where can our audience find you online? Do you have social media? Do you have a website?
Yes, I do. I've got my Instagram, which is Nature Therapy 8, and that's got some information about the kind of places that are really good to go. And I also have my website, which is eduk8.com.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Nutritank podcast. It was an absolute honor to have you on, and it was a really amazing conversation, and I hope our audience got a lot from it.
Thank you so much. It was a huge honor, and I hope that it's been helpful. and you can step outside and reset.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, share it with your friends and family and drop us a review on your preferred podcast platform. Don't forget to follow the show on your favourite streaming platform and connect with us online to stay up to date with all the latest news and episodes. If you feel engaged with a particular aspect of today's show, then please comment on our social media posts for this episode. They'll be linked in the show notes. See you in the next episode.